So with all of the Attack on Titan and Demon Slayer hype, I thought it'd be a great time to talk about My Dress Up Darling, because why not? I have seen a very small amount for this anime. I know it has a lot of support, it's currently doing extremely well, the anime has a lot of praise towards it, so I decided, you know what, I'll give it a read. I'll see what it's about. I found myself thoroughly enjoying this manga, and for completely different reasons. First and foremost, it's not what I actually expected. On the surface, you definitely get some sort of impression, you make some sort of opinionated guess on what the story is, but at least within the manga, when you start to actually read on further through it and what the story truly claims itself to be, there's a lot of nuance underneath. There's a lot of beauty to be had within its characters. So while it does dance around the concept of being lewd, it does marriage itself to a reasoning why it's there to begin with. It's not just randomly thrown in there as fan service, even though it is weaponized as fan service. It actually is propelled through the story and what it actually entails, what these characters are trying to achieve. And I found this rather impressive with how it's actually achieved. To put simply, a very massive contrast between its very surface level interpretation and what you may actually hear within the grapevine, compared to yourself actually reading it or watching it and finding out it's actually a pretty intuitive story underneath, and has bits and pieces of importance to tell. If you do think its only redeeming quality is it being lewd, stick around. You might find a different enjoyment for it after this video. But with that, let's begin. To start things off, I thought I would give you a little bit of a synopsis to make it a bit easier, right? We follow the story of Wakana Gojo, a teenage boy that's somewhat reclusive, doesn't have any friends, doesn't really speak to people, sticks to himself, and there's a kind of a big reason for this, which is he's riddled with anxiety. And this comes from a pretty simple but seemingly very common traumatizing event within his life as a child, and it directly kind of has influenced his day-to-day life, his home life, and how he interprets it, really. You see, Wakana makes Hina dolls. He has this very massive passion for Hina dolls. He loves creating them. He creates the clothes. He wants to perfect the craft of sculpting a beautiful face and a figure and the hair, and there's all of these very detailed intricacies that go into creating these Hina dolls. This is Wakana's passion, and this has transferred over to him from his grandfather, someone that he too also works on Hina dolls and is a professional within that field. And the house that they live in is also a shop for making and selling Hina dolls. So Wakana has quite literally been molded and raised into this passion itself, and it has bloomed obviously onto him. This trauma comes into the form of being called disgusting. That Wakana, because he is a guy, shouldn't be working or anywhere near Hina dolls. Now, this is children. Children say very nasty things, not much of a thought process going on there, but obviously it has severely affected Wakana and his judgment towards people. So he has become reclusive in his passion, which, being that it's such a massive driving force for his life, he finds it difficult to communicate with anyone. This is a continued, perpetual cycle of anxiety. Now, one day when he's at school, working on his Hina dolls, in the comfort of his own kind of realm, his own space, someone walks in on him, and it's this woman, our other main character, Marin Kitagawa, the complete opposite of Wakana, someone that is very outgoing, very bubbly, very friendly, very playful, all of the above, stuff that Wakana has never imagined in his life whatsoever. Instantly, as soon as she walks into the room, Wakana has the worst perception of her, and it's not just directed towards her, it's directed towards everyone, that she's going to judge him. She's going to belittle his passion, belittle his love for Hina dolls and its creation and its conception, and he kind of buckles up in that regard. He shuts down. But to his surprise, Kitagawa doesn't actually do this. She's intrigued by the Hina dolls, intrigued by his passion. If anything, she appreciates the amount of effort that he puts into his Hina dolls, into his passion, as that's something that she appreciates as an individual, something that she values. You get this very strong impression of Kitagawa, that she's not someone to belittle another person just because of their passions, what they like, what they enjoy doing. So this puts Kitagawa and Wakana kind of together, and Kitagawa herself finds out that the clothing on the Hina dolls are very intricate, very detailed, and wonders if the production of those clothes on the Hina dolls could translate to something bigger. So she proposes a question. Now that they're on speaking terms and Wakana feels somewhat relieved that he's not going to be judged for his Hina dolls and kind of has this new perspective on Kitagawa herself, she prompts the question if he would be interested in creating cosplay clothing for her, as that is her passion, to cosplay to its most accurate and detailed degree. Thus, these two would form a working relationship with one another, Wakana taking his very detailed knowledge of Hina dolls and transferring it over to creating clothes, using all the tools at his disposal, and Kitagawa obviously cosplaying these clothes to her heart's extent. This is my dress-up darling, and at first it doesn't sound like anything crazy, and admittedly it doesn't have to be anything crazy, but it does offer a very interesting experience, one that I feel like a lot of people may not have enjoyed before, or at least have the opportunity to witness, right? A anime or manga surrounding cosplay I don't see all too often, and when I say that it surrounds cosplay, I also mean the creational part of cosplay, what actually goes into it, the fundamentals, creating the clothes, the appearance, the makeup, the fabric, the materials, everything that goes into it, the mindset. There is a lot of excruciating detail that this manga truly puts in with all of its characters and all of this stuff. It doesn't just bypass the cosplay experience. Wakana just doesn't instantly make clothes. You go through this methodical process of understanding yourself on how to create clothes. I wouldn't be surprised if you could come away from reading this manga or potentially watching this anime and know how to make some sort of clothes yourself. That is how detailed it can be. And it doesn't just do it for this, it does it for makeup as well. It does it for appearances, it does it for understanding fabric and materials. So all of these pockets of information has been so well researched and compiled into this manga that swirls around to create this very informative and honestly well experienced concept. The creation and understanding of cosplay. Once again, personally, I haven't read anything that has focused on this, so it's a new experience. And for me, it's very well done. There is a couple of hiccups here and there, but nothing all too drastic, nothing all too major. I get onto those later on, but this story has a plethora of things to offer. It does bring up a lot of conversations surrounding the cosplay world, and for myself, I don't really know all too much about it. So having a different perspective on the situation from this manga and being able to understand it through it is really worthwhile. For a lot of people, I feel Wakana being the main character is going to be a little bit boring. He's not the most outlandish individual. He's not anything all too crazy, but he has a lot of soul within him. And I think this oozes onto his passion, onto his very heartfelt appreciation for his Hina dolls, and how this slowly translates over to the relationships he starts to build because of the clothes that he is making for Kitagawa. He starts to become a completely different individual, but one that feels more healthy, one that is growing and learning and understanding and accepting a lot of different things. See, the world of cosplay puts him in the direct firing line of his previous trauma. And this is where I feel like the story does not showcase this on the surface. So while it pretty simply parades itself as being lewd or romance or a comedy, underneath it deals with this very real trauma. Not in the most serious of ways, but it does bring a serious conversation and a serious perspective, and that is something that I really appreciate. Once again, the trauma that Wakana has is very deep rooted. It's from his childhood, and it's people judging him for his passion. His passion is not a manly one. Now obviously today that is a very outdated perspective. People are going to be mean regardless, but this whole judgmental aspect for genders and what they should or shouldn't do shouldn't be a thing. It should be non-existent. People should be allowed to enjoy whatever they want, regardless of whatever gender or how they identify themselves to be. Wakana's experience directly links to the cosplaying world, and we focus on this quite often in a lot of different ways, but through different characters, through Wakana creating clothes. He too also experiences a different version of it going into it. Him being prejudged by a lot of people, not necessarily in a negative way, but a way that he is scared of perceiving it to be negative. Because of his past experiences, is very scared to talk about these things, including just making clothes for Kitagawa, because he's scared of being judged. And you can't necessarily blame him for it, but he himself self-recognizes that he can't always have this negative perception of people based off a past experience. He realizes that people can and will be mean, but not everyone. time and time again throughout the story, he realizes this as he goes into this conversation with this perception of someone being negative towards himself. That why is a male making clothes or working on Hina dolls, for example, but only for it to turn around and find out that these people appreciate him, that they think it's really cool, that they think it's really admirable that he has talent and this skill, and that he's willing to put the time and effort into understanding these concepts. This is a massive relief to him. And honestly, one of the biggest things that I'm impressed with reading through the manga and Wakana's journey or development in itself is that his growth is so seamless. It's something that feels genuinely real, that you yourself could experience this or even have experienced this in your everyday life. And especially so in a place like school where everyone is so judgmental, where everyone has this perspective of what should be right or wrong and what genders or identities should be doing this or that, when in reality, it shouldn't matter at all. Your identity shouldn't define your passion or what you can and can't do. And for My Dress Up Darling, it shouldn't define what type of clothes you wear, which is another conversation that comes into play. And one that I think is very important for cosplay as a community, that regardless of your shape, your gender, your identity, your image, that you should be able to cosplay whoever you want, however you want, to whatever degree or length that you want. It's not about who has tailor-made clothes or the most expensive taste or the most perfect portrayal of that character. It's all about having fun. It's all about indulging within that passion alongside other people that are also indulging within that passion. My Dress Up Darling focuses directly on a character that experiences something similar to Wakana himself, but in the case of cosplaying, it is a guy cross-dressing as a woman, something that he finds passionate. And you spend a little bit of time focusing on this directly because it links almost perfectly with Wakana's. This would just be a supporting character that is eventually gone within the story, but one that is worthwhile and memorable, and they both grow from one another. Wakana realizing that himself and this guy that likes to cosplay as women have a very common trauma, a very common experience of judgmental people judging them. So they actually support each other, they uplift each other. Wakana reiterates that he would never judge this person, that they should be able to just have fun with whatever they're doing, and that is what that person is doing. It's a very wholesome and seamless and real portrayal of feelings, of people in a field or a community that can and sometimes be toxically judgmental. You may have already noticed, but this is kind of the core of My Dress Up Darling, and it sounds very different to what the surface is, right? Now, this is only really Wakana, and a lot of it is kind of pushed through Wakana because he is the main character, but the only reason it's somewhat possible to an extent, or why it's even accessed so effortlessly, is because of how it's married with Kitagawa, our other main character. Because of her being very bubbly and open and playful and kind of chaotic in a sense, and her not judging people at all, she plays the best pushing force for Wakana, who may be a little bit resistant or uncomfortable going into certain things, but with Kitagawa there makes it almost effortless. Because of her emphasis, because of her personality, she provides this support or comfort that Wakana actually needs. She would be the person that slowly heals his trauma and opens up his world more and more to new things, breaks out of his anxiety bit by bit. Is taking two completely different polar opposites, putting them together and sharing the world that they both inhabit. And Wakana benefits exponentially from this. It's not at a rapid pace. He doesn't just suddenly change, but slowly over time and over the 50 to 60 odd chapters that you read, you'll notice that he becomes more and more less anxious. He becomes more and more confident and comfortable within his own passions. That includes his Hina doll creations, as well as creating clothes for Kitagawa and anyone else. He starts to speak more with people that aren't Kitagawa. He starts to slowly make friends. And while it's scary for him, he feels comfortable knowing that like-minded people like Kitagawa is there for him, is there to support him. This relationship between the two obviously buds into something a little bit more. So while all of this is kind of stitched together with lewdness and very quirky and comedic and romantic moments, it's also a lot of innocence within it. Wakana has never really talked to people, so Kitagawa is very playful in that regard, very overly playful. And she knowingly puts Wakana in very odd or difficult positions for himself because he's never really had any experience with people, let alone women. Their friendship blooms blooms into romantic feelings, which is where the romantic side of things come into play. It's not overly headstrong, but it is there. It doesn't completely maneuver the narrative left and right, but it has enough of an emphasis and an understanding for it to glue a lot of pieces together. Plus, it's genuinely a nice thing. Their relationship is very wholesome. As people, they are completely opposites, but they have grown together exponentially, and their relationship, because of it, is very beautiful. The only real hiccup that I have with this story, and it's kind of a personal complaint, right? I don't think this would dictate your entire experience. I don't think it would ruin it. I don't think it would make you stop reading it, but it will make you a little bit confused. There is points when you're reading this series where the story will just randomly jump, not in time, but in place or perspective, right? And I've noticed that a lot of romantic or comedy driven stories do it similar to this, where they will vaguely reference something that may happen in the future, and then instantly at the end of the chapter and then start of the next one, they will jump to it. And they may jump midway between what they were actually referencing. So you don't even get the start up for it, you don't get the build up for it, you don't slowly progress to it or over a handful of chapters or a handful of days within the world. Instead, you're just randomly put straight within it. This can be very jarring. If you're not really paying attention and it's something that you have off to the side, you will be very confused on how we got here, and you may think that you've glossed over like 6 different chapters that you've missed. To my loose knowledge, there's no chapters missing, and this is just how the author likes to jump into events that aren't necessarily all too important or all too focused around, but still important enough to actually showcase. It's almost like cutting off all of the excess waste that may not necessarily be needed, but all of that excess weight sometimes is pacing. It allows people to kind of get into the mindset of what's coming next. In that sense, it's kind of a double-edged sword. Cut off all of the unnecessary stuff to get to the more important things, but you lose a lot of the inherent pacing that a lot of people feel comfortable with. To me, this is the only real issue I have with the manga, and as you can tell, it's not really a big one. It's kind of just random. I couldn't tell you where it happens exactly, but a lot of different times, at least 4 or 5, it will just randomly jump towards different things, different chapters, and you just don't know where you are. And you will feel like you have skipped over at least a minimum of 5 chapters. But once you get past that, it's pretty much smooth sailing. To end this off, because I feel like it's been going on a little bit too long and you kind of get the whole idea of what this story is about, My Dress Up Darling is a very enjoyable experience. I understand it may not be for everyone. Even myself, I'm not too massive on rom-coms, but I found myself genuinely enjoying this manga. It has a lot of interesting things to show and to tell, and I believe the biggest thing that it pushes is your passion is your own. And don't let people influence that passion as best you can, regardless of your identity, regardless of your gender, regardless of how you look, regardless of what you can or can't do. None of that negative judgment should influence your passion. You should be able to do whatever you want freely. If you love it, that's all that matters. There will always be negative people, and there will always be people that will try to bring you down for those reasons, but do your best not to let them get under your skin. This is what My Dress Up Darling tries to get across to you. It plays it in a lot of different ways, and I appreciate it for doing it rather well. For people that are looking for something that isn't all too serious, maybe something to fill in the blanks for other series, or maybe you're looking for something new to read regarding romantic comedy, I think My Dress Up Darling would be good for you. It's a nice little read, it's not all too long, it's not all too heavy, and you'll find a lot of enjoyment with a lot of sincerity behind it. I 100% recommend it for those that are interested. Endtime. So welcome to the end of the video. If you have made it this far, thank you. I appreciate you. If you have read or even watched My Dress Up Darling, I would love to know how you feel about it. On the surface, it's one thing, but underneath, there's a lot of interesting conversations to have about it. And I'm sure with the story itself, a lot of people can relate to it. It's a very easy thing to find that relation and to find comfort in this story itself. How characters portray themselves, how they grow, how they develop over time. Knowing that you are worthy and that you can do your passion regardless of what anyone else says. Let me know within the comment section below. But with that, I want to thank you all for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Leave a like and subscribe. I would greatly appreciate it. Drink plenty of water, and I will see you within the next one. Goodbye.